On Point is brought to you by National Baking Company.
Good evening and welcome to On Point. I'm your host, Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Chong.
How are you, Dennis?
I'm good.
Yeah?
How are you doing?
Have you seen the news with... I feel like every week we have to give a Trump report or a Trump update.
Oh, Kim Jong-un is his best friend.
Now he wants... he said he'd be honored.
Yes.
He'd be honored.
Yes. So the leader, I imagine the leader of the free world meeting with these two who are called despots. I mean, that's a pretty sight, eh?
And not just that, but being honored to meet with them.
Yes, and for me, very importantly, too, what was really striking was that he wasn't at the White House correspondent dinner. Very, very much so. I mean, it's something that we expect the president to be at. We always look forward to the president's presence and the speech. I mean, Obama was a rock star at the correspondence dinner. But you know, his relationship with the media hasn't been the best, so perhaps it wasn't a huge surprise. But it was a disappointment. I wanted to see him at the dinner. Well, the Economic Growth Council also released its second quarterly report this week. We're going to talk about that coming up in the first part of the show. And in the second part, we're going to be looking at the NHT, and we could call it its new mandate, as the Prime Minister said, to build more house. Yes. So we're going to look at that. But before we do that, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories this week.
At number 5, National Commercial Bank of Jamaica, NCB, is recording its highest profits ever. NCB reported $5.87 billion profit for its second quarter ended March 2017. That's up 2/3 over the same period last year. Earnings per share are up from $1.47 to $2.39. The bank says this is a result of their growth strategy, which includes regional expansion and greater efficiency. At number 4, 9 entities have applied for pre-qualification to become the new owners of the Norman Manley International Airport, NMIA. This in response to the Development Bank of Jamaica DBJ's request for public-private partnership. DBJ Managing Director Milverton Reynolds says the NMIA Enterprise team will review the submissions and announce a shortlist in a few weeks. At number 3, the government plans to use $3.5 billion from the reserves of the National Health Fund NHF to fund a major overhaul of the country's health infrastructure. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says according to a study by KPMG, the NHF will still comfortably be able to meet its obligations over the next 10 years. He says the major overhaul will include scoping, repairing and upgrading a number of critical institutions across the country. At number 2, the developers of the North-South link of Highway 2000 are losing almost twice as much as they're making from the highway each year. It was revealed during a parliamentary committee meeting this week that Jamaica North-South Highway Company is spending an estimated $30 million each year on debt servicing, but they're only making $18 million from the toll road. Officials say it could take another 20 years before the highway starts turning a profit. And your top business story this week is about PetroCaribe, the special arrangement with Venezuela under which Jamaica gets concessionary financing for oil. State Minister for Finance Favour Williams revealed this week that oil imports from Venezuela have been dwindling for over a year. According to Mrs. Williams, in 2016, Jamaica only imported 1 million barrels of oil from Venezuela, down from 7 million the year before. That's expected to fall to just 500,000 barrels this year.
And when we come back, what progress are we making towards the 5 and 4 goal, the EGC's main goal? That and more after the break. Welcome back. Well, the Economic Growth Council, EGC's second quarterly report focused on the nation's security goals. The EGC held a press event with guest speaker Alvaro Uribe, the former president of Colombia, last week. Here's more.
It's the country's second report card from the EGC, and according to Growth Czar Michael Lee Chin, things are looking up.
The salient initiatives that I'm reporting on tonight would be the deliverables on the citizen security and public safety and access to finance. And I'm happy to say all those deliverables have been met. So congratulations, Dr. Major General.
The EGC chairman highlighted key legislations in security which have allowed agencies like MOCA to operate independently as a step in the right direction.
These bold structural reforms and others to come are designed to tackle corruption, reduce crime, and tackle both the economic and broader social ramifications.
And we're joined now by Vice Chair of the Economic Growth Council, Dr. Nigel Clark. Welcome back to On Point.
Thank you for having me, Kalila and Dennis.
Yeah, welcome, Nigel. Nigel, let's start with the second quarterly report last week, Thursday. You focused on security as the main issue, but is there anything in particular that you'd have said that you want to discuss in terms of the achievements that we've had over the past quarter or so?
Yes, Dennis. So the Economic Growth Council recommended a portfolio of initiatives, chief of which was focusing on improving citizen security and public safety. And within that initiative recommended a few policy goals that were adopted by the government. And having been adopted, the EGC agreed with the government on a timeline for implementation of some of those policies. The focus was on security for this particular report because there were quite a few policy goals in the security space that were to have been met by March. And indeed, a few of them, if you want me to discuss, one of them was to ensure that the government tables in Parliament a bill to create an independent agency to focus on organized crime, and that was done with the MOCA bill, where MOCA existed, but it was a part of the Jamaica's Constabulary Force, came under the direction of the JCF. That bill establishes MOCA as an independent law enforcement entity. If you want to think about it, one way of thinking about it is a law enforcement entity that is similar to the FBI, focused on organized crime, serious cases of corruption, and other things that retard economic activity and create fear. Another time-bound goal for March that existed was to submit to Cabinet a plan for the rationalization of police stations. The police stations, for the most part, that we have in Jamaica, many of them, they were placed in those locations decades ago. The geography of Jamaica has changed, the demography of Jamaica has changed, and it's arguable that we don't have police stations in all the right places. Now, one approach is simply to just build new police stations wherever ones don't exist, but that is probably not a wise approach. The first, what we recommend first is to look at the distribution of police stations vis-a-vis your population centers, vis-a-vis where historically crimes have been committed, and where your resources are placed today. And then the next step would be to say, okay, where do we need new police stations? Where can we merge stations? Or in some cases, close stations.
Or we could go with mobile stations also.
Exactly. Yeah. That's another thing that has changed. Police station, as I understand it as a layman, every police station needs a fixed number of people who are just there because the bricks and mortar exist. The idea is to, and certainly the literature suggests, moving towards a more mobile strategy. And so the first step of submitting to the Cabinet a plan for the rationalization of police stations has been completed. And that deadline was set for March. There are, within the security space, there were deadlines set for later in the year, and we published this booklet in the report to to the country that details all of the policy proposals that have been accepted by the government, along with the due dates, the responsible ministries, and whether they've been achieved or not. And as making the point that within the security space, even though it's not tabled here in this document, but it's summarized in the executive summary, some of the targets for later in the year have also been met. So that's good news.
Early.
Yeah, that is generally sort of good news. This is not a panacea, clearly, but these are essential elements if we are
but
to...
not all the targets have been met, so what's the bad news?
Yeah.
No, not all the targets have been met, but you asked me about security to begin with, and I'm saying within citizen security and public safety, all the targets have been met.
All the targets for citizen safety and security.
Yes, but in other areas, if you're going to move to those areas, then in other areas, a few targets have been lagging behind.
Well, before we move on to the other areas, this week as well, the National Security Minister, Bobby Montague, presented what we'd call his crime plan, the much anticipated five-pillar crime plan. It's a 132-page document. Has the EGC had an opportunity yet to go through it?
No, we haven't had a chance to review it just yet, but very happy to see that it has been produced.
All right, well, I guess we get that update when you do. Sure.
But in terms of the other things that we have not met, Nigel, what are some of those things? I mean, I see the Ministry of Finance features heavily in this as not being met, and the DBJ.
Yes, so we have quite a few targets that have been met. On a first glance, I'm seeing we have about 13 or 14 targets that have been met, and about 5 targets that have not been met. The first thing I want to make a point on is that, at least this establishes that the EGC, in its role of holding the government to account on its policy commitments, the EGC is a frank broker.
Yes.
And if targets have not been met, the Economic Growth Council has no inhibition in making that known. And that is the framework. That's the design of the framework that the Growth Council not only made a series of recommendations, but it went further to agree on with the government on which ones are going to be implemented, so we don't have this, this business of things sitting on a shelf. And then, to the government's credit, they empowered the Growth Council to follow up with ministries, departments, and agencies to see that the policies that have been agreed to are being implemented, and then further, the government empowered the Growth Council to report to the country. So, I think that it's a framework that can only, in the long run, lead to progress. So let's get back to the question you asked. A few of them that have not been met. One of them, for example, is to complete the public procurement regulations.
And that one is significant.
That one is a very important target. Should have been met for March. As you know, there's a new Procurement Act that was brought into being, I think, in about 2014. And there are regulations. Every piece of legislation has
for it
power,
to be active.
But for it to be really active, you need the regulations.
Before you continue, why is it so important?
It's so important because the government is still a very large part of our economy, and every dollar that the government spends has to be spent according to procurement guidelines and rules. Now, if those guidelines and rules are inefficient, then it means that a whole government revenues represent a huge chunk of GDP. Government expenditure, 30% of GDP or thereabouts, 27% of GDP. And if the rules by which the government can procure, can engage in expenditure are cumbersome and inefficient and lead to delays, it means that your economy is not going to turn over at the pace that it otherwise can. And so it's absolutely crucial that the regulations and in not meeting the target, I can also say that the expectation is that the target will be met in May, as it has been reported to us, as far as the regulations are concerned.
Because I was just about to ask, was it close to being met, or is it still a far away from being completed?
We're dealing with a binary thing here. It has not been met. I don't want to get into the, so close, but the Economic Growth Council expects that by May, the completion of the public procurement regulations will be finished. The Handbook of Public Sector Procurement Procedures may take longer. But what a process like this does, Dennis and Kalila, is to force the government or to encourage the government to align resources with policy priorities. And if this is a policy goal that's important, then resources will be aligned. But to be fair, I want to,
this is the Ministry of Finance, right?
Yeah,
that was responsible.
It is the Ministry of Finance, but just to be fair, and it's important to be, with the trust and confidence and the power that the government has invested in the Economic Growth Council in reporting to the country on these things. It's important to be fair, and I would posit as a reasonable, I don't want to use the word excuse, but the fact that this has been a budget period which has been extremely demanding, as we all know, given what has transpired and the various policy proposals and so forth, and that might have been a casualty of it.
But we don't want to be making excuses.
But no excuses.
I mean, but
I want to be.
This one is a huge one. I know, for example, with the privatization of the dumps, because of a simple procedural error in the procurement, we've lost over the past 2 to 3 years $1 billion worth of investment.
Yes, no, procurement is a foundation thing, and there are other things that I'm sure we're going to discuss at some point in which procurement, you'll hear the word procurement coming up again.
What are the other ones?
The other ones, there was a policy agreement, a policy commitment for, again, the Ministry of Finance to create a public debt reduction program through privatizations, asset sales. The idea behind this...
this one is big also. Eh?
It's big. From the Economic Growth Council perspective, right, is that privatizations and asset sales are a part of trying to stimulate economic growth through using our assets more efficiently. So we call that greater asset utilization. And we also know through the public sector, transformation program that those divestments and privatizations are, it's public information. Caymanas was just divested. The Norman Manley International Airport is going through a divestment process now.
Again,
well.
Easier said than done with Norman Manley.
Right. But I think there's a lot of room to be optimistic. But
this time.
Yes, indeed. But what we want to make sure from the Economic Growth Council perspective is that when those privatizations and asset sales are completed, that the money is not used to plug recurrent expenditure. The assets of the country, in our view, from the Economic Growth Council's perspective, should be used to reduce the obligations that we as Jamaican people have. Right? If you're going to sell the assets that we own, from an Economic Growth Council perspective, and I am very, at pains to make it from our perspective as the Economic Growth Council. The view is that those resources should be used to reduce government debt.
Yes.
The faster we can reduce debt is the more secure we'll be as a country.
And that can have a very big impact. About how much do you expect to be able to reduce government debt through this strategy?
Can I preface it by saying that the amount is not what is important? It is what you're communicating to the Jamaican people, what you're communicating to the investing public, both locally and internationally, that you're absolutely serious about reducing debt. The fact of the matter is that Jamaica's debt, because of historical reasons that you could have an entire series on, not just one program, is very high. It's approximately $18 billion US. You have to have a whole lot of assets to sell to be able to.
So it's really just a 1 or 2% impact.
It's a 1 or 2% impact.
Yeah. It wouldn't be anywhere near, say, the debt buyback with PetroCaribe. That type of impact in reducing the debt to GDP ratio. Nothing near that.
No. The impact of you're talking 1 or 2% or thereabouts.
But one of the benefits of that, for me more than anything else, is that you put the assets now in the market, in the private hands, and it can work much more efficiently.
Yes.
And generate more economic activity.
Yes. So you look at, I mean, we can go on. The other one that wasn't met is related to asset utilization, and it was the EGC agreed with the government that by March, a plan would be submitted to Cabinet for the divestment of up to, so it didn't say 20%, it said up to 20% of the assets held by UDC and Factories Corporation. You know, public corporations, the urban development corporations and the factories corporations of Jamaica, you know, it is estimated hold 100 billion Jamaican dollars worth of assets. And if you look at the net income of those two entities, it demonstrates that the return on those assets in the hands of the UDC and FCJ is minuscule. It's a couple $100 million a year when the asset base is about 100 billion. That doesn't make sense in the long run, right? We want those assets to generate more employment for Jamaicans and more income for Jamaica. And therefore, if those assets can be responsibly, and not all of them, just a you know, up to 20%, it could be 10%, could be responsibly divested in a manner that leads to better resource allocation, greater efficiencies, in a manner that generates more employment, then Jamaica and Jamaicans are the better off for it.
So what's holding up these two targets?
You know, it's not my role as, you know, the capacity as Vice Chairman of the Economic Growth Council to surmise as to what is holding it up. Our role is just to report that the targets were set for March 31st and they were not met by March 31st. Okay. We believe that by the next reporting date, these two should be met, but that's not up to us. That's up to the ministries, departments, and agencies who have. But
certainly the EGC will be pushing it also behind the scenes to ensure that they're met.
Well, just the publication of this is pressure in itself.
Yeah. And you are happy with where it is now, though. I mean, because I know there's a 5% for 2020. You're happy with the progress that is being made.
Yes, we're happy with progress that's been made. You know, we measure it in a variety of ways. One of the very important ways of sort of measuring progress is just attention to the topic of economic growth. Yes. Right? We think that the debut of the Economic Growth Council has in some way led to a refocus on the imperative for economic growth. And, you know, people see me, I mean, just as an example, I've run into people in the pharmacies or on the street who, you know,
people are a lot more aware.
People are a lot more aware.
But with that awareness also comes the greater risk of people being turned off. So it means that EGC has to keep ramped up in terms of publicity and all that out there, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to sustain this. The Growth Council has a life of 4 years, of which one has gone. Yeah. That's 16 quarters. All right, so that's 16 reports. We've done 2. So this has to be sustained over the medium term. And it means that more policy objectives have to be generated, and more discussion has to be had with the government, and more targets agreed. You know, we fundamentally believe that when we as a society, when we as Jamaicans take ownership of our own destiny as far as economic growth is concerned, and don't just leave it to the government or to any single party, the better off we will be.
So what we've seen now, Khalila, is that we want to call it out, the Ministry of Finance, the UDC, the FCJ, and the DBJ and Ministry of National Security has prevented the perfect score for this quarter.
Then you're going to end that note. We have to talk about those who have. We didn't talk about all those who have met.
Yes,
to be fair. To be fair,
yes.
Right? So access to finance, some of which is in the Ministry of Finance as well. A lot of those targets have been met. You know, the MCT test for insurance companies with the Financial Services
A lot of targets have been met.
Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Agriculture.
But we want those that have not performed for them to do better.
Ministry of Health has met theirs. Financial Services Commission has met theirs. Local government met theirs as well. So just to be
So there's working, and we need the other working, right?
I'm agreeing with you if your objective is to have a perfect score. We shouldn't have any targets that are not met. But the good news is that the Economic Growth Council is going to call it as it is.
The objective ultimately is 5 and 4. We're going to ask you to stay with us, Dr. Clark. After the break, we'll ask him to wear his other hat as chairman of the National Housing Trust, and we'll also be joined by a former chairman as well. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, Prime Minister Andrew Holness has mandated the National Housing Trust to build more house, to use his words. And he made those comments in March, saying there would not be a debate over the use of NHT funds if the agency was simply using its reserves to build enough houses to meet the demand. Here's more.
With the debate ranging about whether the Holness administration should do like previous governments and continue to take billions of dollars from the National Housing Trust, the Prime Minister said if the money was being used to build more houses, then there would be no argument. Prime Minister Holness claimed that if the NHT was using more of the money available to build houses, then there would be no reserves to take. He said that's why he was mandating the NHT to build more houses. The Prime Minister said because successive governments have not been building houses at a pace to keep up with demand, the surplus has grown exponentially.
Welcome back. We're now joined by the current chair of the NHT, Dr. Nigel Clark, putting on a different hat, and a former chair of the NHT, Mr. Howard Mitchell. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to On Point.
Thank you to be here. Thank you for keeping me.
Let me start with you, Howard. You were at the NHT.
A long time ago.
Right. Yeah. You see where we are today, right? There's a lot of debate around it. What are your views on how the NHT should be positioned? Before we ask Nigel to tell us how he is positioned.
Okay. I'm on record in 2011, after I came up the learning curve. It took me 4 years to do that, but that we have a housing crisis. I haven't changed my position. I'm on record in 2011 in saying that it's time for us to take Operation Pride off the shelf, dust it off, call it a different name, put proper management in there, and implement it. Okay?
And for those who aren't familiar with Operation Pride,
right, which essentially
there was a lot of scandal about around it.
There was scandal about it. $11 billion were squandered, right? So I'm not proposing that we do that again. But Operation Pride was a sort of build on your own land enterprise. It was a self-help structure that was aimed at the lowest demographic to provide them with the ability to put a roof over their heads, right? And they used a cooperative mechanism, a cooperative society mechanism. We'd have to examine all of that. But all I'm saying is that there are different levels of the crisis. There's a crisis in the middle class for housing, for young middle class people. There is a crisis at the D, C and D level, the white collar and blue collar level for housing. But the crisis that in my view really is impacting across the societal terrain is squatting and homelessness. And homelessness for people who can afford a basic shelter, but there's none. And you can't leave that to the private sector. Right? It's the state.
So that's where the NHT needs to shift its focus.
That's the crisis. And I'm saying that we haven't addressed it. I didn't address it. Successive chairman, successive NHT administration, successive governments have not addressed it.
So what's your view, Nigel, on it, and where is that something you're considering now?
Jamaica does not produce enough houses to supply the demand. That is a provable fact. Jamaica does not produce enough houses, furthermore, to supply the demand at particular demographics. On the low end, in terms of the socioeconomic scale, we don't really have many private developers who specialize in that area. You can find quite a few people who build houses in the middle income tier of the market, but on the lower end, that's not the case. And the demand there is excessive. Yeah. The NHT just broke ground on a project in St. James in February to build 1,500 houses at the lower end of the spectrum. And we had an advertisement out for interest, and the number of people who applied greatly exceeded the number of houses that were available. So that is a fact, and is something that we at NHT are focused on. If I may step back a bit, and you know, the NHT primarily intervenes in the housing market through the provision of mortgages. That is our sort of number one use of cash flow. The NHT doesn't go out there and actually build houses or construct houses, but what we do, we act as a catalyst in the housing market. We have conversations with developers. We help projects to go along, so to speak, and we develop and conceptualize and then hire contractors and so forth. So we at the NHT are focused on ensuring that the segment that has been deprived of product for the longest, meaning the lower income segment, that gap is addressed.
Is it just that simple, though, Mr. Mitchell, to build more houses? Because I saw your comments on social media when Andrew Holness said, build more house.
You mean in terms of, it's build more house, but in my
What's the challenge? Why haven't we been doing that?
Right. First of all, the NHT cannot satisfy the housing crisis, okay? The housing crisis has to be addressed by a number of, in an interministerial way, by a number of interventions. Secondly, the NHT does a great job in addressing the needs of a particular segment. It provides mortgages. It does a good job.
But the number of mortgages since 2011 has been falling, which NHT has issued.
Yeah, that is so. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure the reason because I'm not there, but the point is that I'm talking about the people who cannot qualify for a mortgage. Those are the people whose children grow up to shoot policemen. To a great extent. Because they have no roof.
But on that note, then, Howard, should the NHT be repositioning itself and going for a new direction, looking at housing solutions?
Let me jump on that. Dennis, it's probably my sort of appearance on a platform to discuss that is probably a little premature. As you know, the Prime Minister appointed or mandated that the NHT look at itself or be, engage in a process of review. And the NHT has been doing that over the past several months, and it's in the stage now of actually writing up the findings. It has spoken to various stakeholders, to mortgagors, to members. So we had a session with all past chairmen from inception.
I was at one of them.
You were at one. We met with the business groups. We met with the labor unions. Met with representatives of the civil service. Met with people from academia, with multilaterals, and a wide, and many people who I'm not mentioning, a wide consultation process over a long period of time. Looked at a lot of data, and we're in the process of finalizing that, and I would humbly suggest that I come back when that is ready.
Yeah, man, sure. But the fact that you're doing that, the fact that you did that, and the fact that we're not meeting the man means that there's something wrong with the current objective, and it means that there's a change coming. And we'll be happy to have you back, Nigel, because I think this is a very important thing. The squatting thing is a huge problem.
And I think with crime. with respect to Nigel and what he's doing is the right thing, and what is being done is the right thing. And I certainly don't want to contribute to putting him on the griddle in terms of any outcome of that. But my personal view, and this is after much thought, is that you could very well justify the NHT stopping in its tracks and addressing this problem for 5 years.
But if the issue is addressing the needs of those people, as you say, who can't afford a mortgage, what can the NHT practically do about that? Because NHT is not in the business of just giving away money. You have to be able to repay the loan. It's loans that the NHT gives.
And there are creative ways to deal with that. And the NHT, the NHT is a research institution as well. And that's why I think Nigel may be reluctant to go into that area, because I am pretty sure, even when I was there, there were solutions. There are solutions that are proposed. And I think I would defer to his suggestion in that respect. But there are ways, creative ways, of providing housing for people other than the strict institutional mortgage way. Just as an example, the council house way in England, allowing people to rent to buy, that kind of thing. Those are all solutions, and we have to address that. But the first principle, the first thing we have to do is accept that housing is in crisis. And we have not done that. Not in this country.
I remember on the campaign trail, the then JLP in opposition had proposed, I think, increasing mortgages to 60 years. Do you think that's something that's practical, Nigel?
It absolutely is. That's not, I mean, that's not, when you say it's practical, it's administratively practical.
Well, how would that work to have a 60-year mortgage when people are taking out the mortgage at 30, 40 years old?
No, but you go from one generation to the next.
Multi-generational mortgage.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's multi-generational mortgages.
Yeah.
And you don't anticipate that the next generation will move out of the home and want their own home?
Let me just confess to having commented on it at the time and refreshing memory as to the comment, which is I thought that it was a good idea. I had a difficulty seeing how it would apply in our society at this point in time because of the transient nature and to an extent the disruptive nature of our society. It's very hard to find stable generational structures. But it does exist in other societies.
Yeah, I agree with the principle, but you mentioned the thing about our society. One of the things that comes to mind, Howard, is the former Prime Minister, when she was Prime Minister the first time, had built some low-income housing, right? Those things, you had some difficulty with mortgage collection, number one. But number two, I don't know what the maintenance is like in it. And I think that is a significant part of our problem in terms of our housing stock. We don't enforce zoning laws, for example. We don't enforce that structural work be done. And therefore, when you get to a situation like a 60-year mortgage, then your asset really in a society like this is depleting.
Well, let me say this, Dennis, that in a sense, we are finally going about it the right way in that aspect of it. In a low-wage economy, there are certain things that you can only dream of. You cannot implement. So, for instance, in the Denham Town schemes, in the inner city schemes, yes, we did have a higher rate of recidivism, right? But it was not that the people said they would never pay, It is that they said they're not paying,
Right.
It just can't be, They're dealing with other things.
So maybe graduating mortgages, or something like that.
Finding jobs for them concurrently with finding them the house.
So that they can pay for the mortgage.
So they can pay for the mortgage.
But is part of the problem also cultural and psychological, whereas many people at that level feel like they're entitled to it. They ought to be given it for free.
The plantation is alive and well.
You're my MP. You must hook me up with a house.
The plantation is alive and well in our culture at many, many levels. And that's something that we have to address as a nation going into maturity, that we have to change the culture where we expect some of these things to happen because of the relationship that exists in our mind between Bakamasa and the people on the plantation.
But Nigel, let me ask, why wouldn't the NHT though want to get into, there's a lot of money there, into trying to build more houses, even if they're not occupied immediately, because construction does provide a large section of employment for the country. So why wouldn't that be a strategy in terms of trying to move the growth forward and not just taking the money and giving it to the Consol Fund?
Fully engaged in supporting the growth program of Jamaica, and as a result of that, the housing starts that we anticipate over the next 3 years will be greater than the housing starts over any 3-year period. Okay. In the last 10 or 12 or 15 years. So let me repeat that. The housing starts over the next 3 years are going to be greater than the housing starts over any 3-year period.
By what percent?
No, I'm just telling you, they'll be great, substantially greater. Okay. Just to put it in perspective so you understand, the housing starts for the year ended March 2017 was about 2,900. Right. So the housing starts that we are projecting by the year that ends in March 31st, 2018, will be 5,500. That's an increase from 3,000 to 5,500. So already
6 to 7%.
Yes, already this year we've broken ground on 10 projects. 5 of them in Westmoreland, 2 in St. James, 2 in St. Catherine, and we have probably 10, 12, 14 more between now and the end of the year. So the NHT is positioning itself to focus exclusively on activity that promotes home ownership. And alongside the housing starts, we are projecting that our assets that go into mortgage loans will increase from about $14 billion in the year just ended to about $18 billion. A 25% increase year on year. And we expect that in the medium term, that outlay to be sustained. We are looking at various models. When I talk about these housing starts, it consists of the universe of modalities. The build on own land, when you lend people to build on their own land. In some cases, interim financing, where you lend to developers and they develop. Other cases, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom houses, starter units, and doing things with food for the poor. So the entire portfolio.
And you're looking a lot at the West, because they have in Mobay, for example, they have over 20 informal settlements, which when you speak to the police, I said that's a main challenge.
Yeah,
the other thing though, Nigel, when you answer that, is that as you expand these from 3,000 to 5,000 a year, just recently what we had is a cement shortage. Are we talking to the people who have to be stakeholders also to supply those materials to ensure that we don't have that problem again?
One of the truisms, yes, is that as you increase your velocity, you're going to put pressure on the system. And I guess your question is, how much pressure can our economy take in terms of I believe going from 3,000 to 5,000, that won't be a problem.
Well, I said that against the background about how I said about an interministerial approach as needed. More than just saying you're going to build some houses. It's a lot of things that come in.
All the demand and the supply. As far as the cement is concerned, there are ways to address that. But without going into Nigel's plans, the small contractor program is something that is very important because it creates the jobs. It allows individuals to deal directly with the solution to the problem. A lot of those skills.
And then, so heart and all those places need to be involved.
Right. Not so easy to replace those skills.
Yeah, I agree with Howard. The small contractor program is one that we have revived. It was, it was killed for a while. So what we're doing is the major infrastructure works for a lot of these developments are being done by grade 5 contractors. When you have a 84-house development or a 65 house development, you don't need to have the biggest contractors doing that. And Howard is right that it has a growth effect. Just to put it in perspective, The development that we launched in St. James a couple of weeks ago is employing 400 people. There's a development in Hanover that's also employing another 400 people. So the acceleration that we have in a pipeline for housing, we expect to have an incremental benefit on employment, on local economies in which these housing developments are taking place, and on economic growth. And it's something that I'm very, very excited about. There's the pipeline of projects that we have.
Before we wrap, I want to pick your brain on another matter, and it's the issue of PetroCaribe and Venezuela. As we all know, Venezuela is going through
NHT, PetroCaribe.
No, that's why I said a different issue. We have just 2 minutes left,
sure.
And I want to get your views on it. As we all know, Venezuela is going through an economic and political crisis, and as a result, well, maybe not, but the two things are happening at the same time.
I'll say 3 things on it. The first thing I'll say is that Jamaica has always had an arrangement with Venezuela for oil under all kinds of regimes in Venezuela. Right, that's the first. So PetroCaribe is a 2006 manifestation of an enduring relationship. The second thing I'd say is that while oil prices are at the levels that they're at, the incremental benefit of the PetroCaribe arrangement is not necessarily that great. If we had a double whammy, that something happened with PetroCaribe and at the same time oil prices doubled, then you'd have more of a problem. But the third thing I would say, which addresses that particular scenario, is that Jamaica is in a precautionary standby arrangement with the IMF to the tune of $1.7 billion US. What that means is, to the extent that there are balance of payments pressures that result from something like, your oil bill being horrendously increased due to the collapse of PetroCaribe and a doubling of oil prices, the resources would exist for Jamaica to ride through that storm. And that's the purpose of the precautionary standby agreement with the IMF. So, as for the medium term, I'm not preoccupied with worry about that, possibility.
And there's a fourth thing. We're diversifying.
Yes.
So LNG and also.
I know, that's a very important point.
Yeah.
Were this 10 years ago, it would be a different situation. But after the plan that was just launched in Old Harbour comes on stream, in terms of our base load, I don't have the precise number, but I give you approximately 30%, 40% maybe of our base load will have been shifted from HFO to LNG.
Another 10 to 15%.
And then renewables another 10%. So Jamaica is much more resilient today than it was, say, 10 years ago, and we have to continue to build that resilience. But it's not, it should not shake markets. If something happens with PetroCaribe.
Well, a man who wears many hats. Ask him about the Growth Council, NHT, PetroCaribe, many things, and also Howard Mitchell. Thanks for joining us here on Point. When we come back, we'll have your numbers and the word on the street. Welcome back. Well, we've been talking NHT in the latter part of the show and that mandate for them to simply build more houses. But how many houses has the NHT actually built? Here are the numbers.
In 2016, the NHT began over 3,000 housing starts and completed about half of that number. It's an improvement over the previous year, where only 1,400 housing projects were started. However, it's a far cry from 2011, when the NHT started over 6,000 housing projects. In 2016, the NHT issued over 5,000 mortgages, worth over $17 billion. That's about 40% of the total mortgages issued on the market.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked Jamaicans, do you think the NHT money should be used for anything other than housing?
Instead of the money doing something else for other things, I think they should do, like, if it's even some little low-income houses for poor people who contribute to NHT.
I don't think so, because I think they collect it to build houses. So I don't think it should build any other thing outside.
But for that, Michael Malley said it for now. Now the first place when Michael has started, him say I have to build poor people house. And now if poor people not benefit from it.
It can help with the youths, young people, because there's somebody in need of some things where the young people is concerned. So if they can put some money towards that to help the young people back to school and stuff like that, then fine.
No, just house. It is there for house, and from the beginning it's for house, for the people. So house, just house, nothing else, but not house, just house.
Dennis, two very interesting and important conversations going on here at the Economic Growth Council and the National Housing Trust, and they're both tied to each other.
Both related, very much related. I mean, the NHT, I think, can be used to drive economic growth, job creation, housing, and solve the crime issue, because it can address the squatting issue. The security minister, for example, said 40% of Jamaicans are squatting. That's remarkable in a country as well as Jamaica, you know. So it can be helped to solve that problem.
And then when you look as well at the issue of inner city communities that don't have proper street names, proper streets to begin with, unregularized housing.
How do you police that?
Yeah, and the NHT can help with that as well.
And therefore it means that the NHT has been failing, I think, in its mandate. And it also means that people who should have been running it have not been re-looking at the thing, re-strategizing, because you can't expect the mandate 30 years ago to be the same one as it today. You know, society change, so we need to re-look at it.
Yeah, and when we look back at the EGC's targets, first of all, I'm impressed that they're meeting their commitment. They said they were going to provide quarterly reports, and they have been doing that, and they've been making a big deal of it as well, making sure that the publicity is right and the people are aware of what's going on. So they've done their second quarterly report. And
I like to look at the fact that there are some major things that have not happened, and we need to.
But more things have happened than haven't happened.
Yeah, but the more things have happened than haven't happened. But the things that have not happened are really big ones. You know, the privatization and procurement, for example, those are things that can really drive the needle in terms of economic activity and growth. Yeah. So, well, you know the 80-20 rule. Yeah, 20% of the things give you 80% of the impact, and 80% give you 20%. So.
And so you're saying that these ones that haven't been done are the 20%?
They're
among
major.
The 20?
I think they're in the 20%.
Yes. I see. Well, Dr. Clark says he expects at least one of those three to be ready by May. Yeah. So by the next quarterly report, hopefully, they're done. Yes. And we'll keep monitoring it for sure. That's our show here on Point. I want to thank you for joining us yet another week. Thanks to our hardworking production and technical team. I'm Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Strong. Until next week.
On Point was brought to you by National Baking Company.